Can you believe it's almost September? Where did this summer go? It just seems to have flown by this year. Anyways, today I want to jump into another behind the design video, and that is taking a look at a super unique project we're pretty well finished up and moving into the construction side of, and that is renovating an old apartment, an old railroad style apartment in New York. The goal for this renovation was to bring back that character, those features of this old 1905 building, those Edwardian or Victorian stylings that you would have often seen back then, all with a modern twist and staying on budget. As I mentioned, we just finished up the design and this project is starting to move into that construction phase. Now, I've worked in New York before, so I'm familiar with small footprints and room constraints that often come with these types of older buildings. Now, that being said, this sort of room or this sort of building was unique in its own right, so I'll give you a bit of a rundown with some of the aspects we were dealing with. The entire apartment has high ceilings, roughly 10 feet tall across the entire place. This immediately makes my brain think upward. There was really only one wall that could be used as kitchen space, and it had a large brick fireplace right in the center of it. The renovation also included the addition to access of a rear yard, and in the process, the window area on the right would also be raised to allow for cabinets or countertop underneath. This may add some additional wall space to make an L-shaped kitchen if necessary. All of the window and door trim would be finished in the original wide moldings. These were roughly 5 inches wide, meaning they would need to be taken into account when laying out cabinets. Finally, there was a small nook across the room where a pantry could be included. In most cases, I find these constraints often dictate where a design will begin. It doesn't matter whether it's a window or a doorway, or in the case of this apartment, the sink plumbing. It had already been roughed in to be right in the middle of the fireplace. Thankfully, the sink is a pretty common starting place anyways, so that made placing our first cabinet really no big deal. On either side of the sink cabinet, I added 2 shallow depth 18-inch cabinets, and these had to be shallow depth simply due to the fireplace structure. This actually seems as good a time as any to discuss budget. Now, for most of us, when we're tackling or planning renovations, our budgets aren't endless. We can't simply do whatever we want with the space, and this project was no different. In this particular kitchen, our client wanted to stick to stock and semi-stock cabinet sizes. So that meant no outrageous cabinet designs and using stock sizes where possible. Ultimately, the 2 shallow depth 18-inch cabinets and the fireplace structure dictated this and the necessary depth for the entire sink area, which is why you'll see these 3 cabinets are pulled out slightly from the rest of the wall. The cool thing about this is it actually works really well with that Victorian theme we were after. In many Victorian kitchens, you'll often see sections of cabinets that are pulled out and increased in depth from the rest of the surrounding area, particularly in the sink or the range. Now, in this case, it worked really well. We pulled out the entire sink area and it made sense with the constraint of that fireplace. It also just happened to be the only area of the kitchen that didn't really change much throughout the entire design process. The first design placed the dishwasher and range off to the left, the fridge directly next to the right side of the fireplace, and an odd little corner area to the very right-hand side. Aesthetically, the design balanced well, but didn't feel quite right. So my client and I went back to the drawing board and hypothetically threw budget out the window for this discussion. It was during this conversation that they mentioned they always wanted a library-style ladder somewhere in their home. We happen to have 10-foot ceilings here, which got my wheels turning. Is that a common phrase? That's a common phrase, right? Got the gears turning, got the wheels turning. Anyways, that led to a pretty drastic redesign for step 2 or iteration number 2. This time around, the corner cabinet and the fridge swapped spots to add more countertop area around the sink, and the wall cabinets were divided into stacked levels with a rail running right up the middle, a perfect place to hang a library ladder. Now this design worked, except it had one major issue: the fridge. I generally try not to place the fridge directly against a neighboring wall so that the doors can only open to 90 degrees. Fail. In this particular design, having the fridge in this location also meant it was going to overlap a window that was off or a pass-through window that looked from the kitchen into the neighboring room. Another fail. However, the bright spot of this design was the stacked cabinets all the way across the room, adding in that rail system, adding in that library ladder, and effectively fulfilling a lifelong wish without breaking the bank for custom cabinets. Client and I met up one more time for another design meeting, and this is where the final design really started coming together. First step was to fix the fridge problem and space it off the wall somehow. Now, my client had a brilliant idea in including some sort of broom or cleaning closet in the overall space, and it just so happened that this might be the perfect area to do it. Now, this is where I'll say that it's not all just about the designer coming up with ideas and the client liking or disliking them. It's a really collaborative process. Think about it, you're in a rowboat and you're both rowing in that direction together. Including a skinny cabinet in this area allowed me to space the fridge away from the pass-through window, add in that small cabinet, and eliminate one of the biggest problems. During this conversation, we also established that the dishwasher wasn't necessary and that space could be better used as storage. Luckily, this was also going to solve another problem. I could address the spacing and the layout of the cabinets above the range, the wall cabinets that is. They never really fit well and never really liked the balance, and I always winded up having to use some sort of non-stock or semi-custom cabinet in there to fill up the entire space. This brings us to the final design. I was able to completely separate the top row of wall cabinets from the row below. I was able to move the range slightly closer to the fireplace, thus squeezing in a 15-inch cabinet on each side. This isn't a big change for the base cabinets, but it makes a huge difference to the wall cabinets above. I can now use a combination of 15-inch and 30-inch wide wall cabinets to create a symmetrical look to that area. So even though it is not two 30-inch cabinets stacked on top of one another, it still appears that way. On the fridge side, I shrunk down the cabinet between the fridge and the fireplace just enough to include a broom closet to the far right. Now, in many kitchens, you might say that having just under 3 feet of space on each side of the sink isn't enough, especially between the sink and the range. And in many times, I'd agree with you. However, not every kitchen or every room fits inside a perfect box that can follow every guideline. This is one of those cases. Ultimately, balancing the space visually, creating more storage, and staying on budget was a much higher priority. Now you might be wondering, well, what about the pantry nook? And why does that cabinet to the left of the range have a different front? Well, the pantry remained relatively consistent throughout every design stage. There was just enough room to build in a 24-inch pantry with drawers at the bottom and doors above. My client plans to utilize the door portion with a slide and hide door that can recess into the cabinet, revealing a small coffee bar. As for the cabinet with the vented front, it will house the new radiator, thus removing it as an impedance next to the back door. Although this project is not complete and there is still a ton of work to do on the construction front, it is definitely going to be one to share with all of you when it is finished. On that note, if you have any questions or curiosities about the design, why we did one thing and not another, or what specific aspects are, let me know down in the comments below and I will do my best to answer all of your questions. If you guys enjoy these behind the design videos, let me know that as well, and I will keep making more of them. Until the next one, thanks a ton for watching. Bye-bye.